The sound of sirens pierced the quiet suburban street as neighbors emerged from their houses, drawn by flashing lights. Emma's home was the center of attention, her normally serene front yard now a chaotic scene. Paramedics rushed to the ambulance, carrying Emma on a stretcher. Her face was pale, her body trembling as she clutched her side, wincing in pain. The murmurs among the crowd grew louder, fueled by curiosity and speculation. "How did this happen?" one neighbor whispered. "She just collapsed," another replied. But those closest to Emma's life, those who had noticed the subtle cracks in her otherwise perfect existence, suspected there was more to the story. Because before the ambulance arrived, the truth had begun to unravel. 3 months earlier, Emma's life seemed ideal. She and her husband, Matt, had built their home in a quiet cul-de-sac where every family knew each other. They often hosted summer barbecues and holiday parties. Emma was the neighborhood's social glue, the one everyone turned to for advice or a friendly chat. But when Brian moved into the house next door, everything changed. Brian wasn't like the other suburban dads. He was younger, single, and carried himself with a casual confidence that drew people in. He'd wave at the neighbors while mowing his lawn, crack jokes at block parties, and somehow always know the right thing to say. To Emma, he was an escape from her increasingly predictable life. At first, their relationship was nothing out of the ordinary. Emma introduced herself as a friendly neighbor, and Brian responded with his usual charm. But soon, their conversations grew longer, stretching into evenings. It was Matt who first noticed. "You've been spending a lot of time with Brian," he said one night over dinner, his tone light, but his eyes searching. Emma laughed it off. "He's just friendly. It's nice to have someone to talk to during the day." Matt didn't press further, but his unease lingered. Emma told herself it was innocent. They were just friends. But the thrill she felt every time Brian texted or stopped by told her otherwise. She started finding excuses to visit him, borrowing tools, delivering homemade cookies, or asking for advice on trivial matters. Brian never pushed. He played it cool, letting Emma come to him. But the tension between them grew with every interaction, unspoken yet undeniable. One evening, after Matt had gone to bed, Emma sat on the back porch, scrolling through her phone. A message from Brian appeared. "Brian, can't sleep. Want some company?" Emma hesitated, her heart racing. She knew it was a bad idea, but the pull was too strong to resist. "Emma, meet me outside." That night on the porch, Emma knew she was about to step over a line she could never uncross. She saw Brian walking toward her, his silhouette lit by the faint glow of the moon. Her heart raced, not from fear, but from the thrill of doing something forbidden. They sat together, their chairs close but not touching. The air was thick with unspoken tension, and Emma couldn't bring herself to look at him. "I feel like I've known you forever," Brian said, his voice low, almost conspiratorial. Emma laughed nervously, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. "That's funny, considering we've only talked for a couple of months." Brian leaned forward slightly, his voice taking on a softer tone. "Sometimes, a couple of months is all it takes." She didn't pull away when he reached out, his fingers lightly grazing hers. That single touch was enough to send a jolt through her body. For a brief moment, she thought about Matt, about their kids sleeping just upstairs. But the guilt was quickly drowned out by the rush of excitement. What began as a moment of weakness quickly snowballed into a full-blown affair. Emma and Brian started meeting regularly, always careful to avoid suspicion. Morning coffee turned into afternoon lunches, and soon, stolen evenings at his house while Matt worked late. Emma knew what she was doing was wrong, but every time she tried to end it, Brian would pull her back in with his charm and easy confidence. Do you really want to go back to the same boring routine? He'd tease, his hand brushing against her cheek. I make you feel alive, don't I? And he was right. He did make her feel alive. But their affair wasn't as secret as they thought. The first crack in their facade came from Karen, the nosy neighbor who lived across the street. Karen had a knack for noticing things other people didn't. She'd seen Emma's car parked in Brian's driveway late at night. She'd noticed the lingering looks between them at neighborhood gatherings. Karen, of course, couldn't resist telling her best friend, Lisa. And Lisa, in turn, told her husband, who worked with Matt. By the time the whispers reached Matt, the rumors had already taken on a life of their own. Matt came home one evening, his face tense and his jaw set. Emma was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner, when he walked in. We need to talk, he said, his voice colder than she'd ever heard it. Emma froze, her hand tightening around the knife. What's wrong? Matt tossed his phone onto the counter. I got a call today. From Greg at work. He said there are rumors about you and Brian. Her heart stopped. What? That's ridiculous. People love to gossip, you know that. Matt's eyes narrowed. Is it gossip? Emma forced a laugh, but it came out shaky. Of course it is. Do you really think I don't know what to think anymore. Matt cut her off, his voice rising. But I've been noticing things, Emma. You're always at his house. Always texting him. And now people are talking about it. Emma swallowed hard, her mind racing for an explanation. He's just a friend, Matt. That's all. But Matt wasn't convinced. The tension in their home grew unbearable. Matt began coming home early, his eyes constantly watching Emma, searching for any sign of deceit. Meanwhile, Emma found herself growing more reckless. The thrill of sneaking around with Brian intensified with the risk of being caught. One night, as Matt sat in the living room, scrolling through his phone, Emma made the mistake of leaving hers on the counter. It buzzed with a message from Brian. Brian, can't stop thinking about you. Same time tomorrow? Matt's hand hovered over the phone. His chest tightened as he read the message, the full weight of the betrayal sinking in. He didn't confront her immediately. Instead, he took a deep breath, his mind formulating a plan. If Emma wanted to play games, he was going to make sure she didn't win. Matt spent the following days in silent rage, pretending nothing was wrong as he pieced together the extent of Emma's betrayal. The message from Brian had been damning, but Matt wanted undeniable proof. He couldn't rely on rumors or confront Emma with mere suspicions. He needed something that would leave no room for lies. The opportunity came faster than he expected. One evening, Emma told Matt she was meeting her friend Melanie for drinks. She kissed him on the cheek, grabbed her purse, and disappeared out the door with a casual wave. But Matt knew better. He'd already spoken to Melanie earlier that day, under the guise of planning a surprise for Emma. Melanie, oblivious to the real reason for Matt's call, had casually mentioned she was going out of town for the weekend. Now, sitting alone in the quiet house, Matt felt the fire in his chest intensify. This wasn't just a suspicion anymore. It was a betrayal playing out right in front of him. He grabbed his keys and followed her. Matt's heart pounded as he parked down the street from Brian's house. Sure enough, Emma's car was in the driveway. The curtains in the living room were partially drawn, and Matt could see the faint glow of the TV inside. Steeling himself, Matt got out of the car and approached the house. He stopped short of knocking, unsure of what he'd do if he confronted them now. Instead, he pulled out his phone and snapped a picture of her car parked outside. He waited there for hours, his anger simmering. Finally, just after midnight, Emma emerged from the house. Her hair was slightly disheveled, her cheeks flushed. She glanced around nervously before slipping into her car and driving off. Matt followed her home, his grip tight on the steering wheel as his thoughts raced. The next morning, Matt decided it was time to act. "Hey, Emma," he said over breakfast, his tone light. "How was your night out with Melanie?" Emma barely glanced up from her coffee. "It was fine," she replied. "We didn't stay out too late. Just caught up for a bit." Matt nodded, his jaw tightening. "That's interesting, because I called Melanie yesterday. She said she's out of town." Emma froze, her hand hovering over her mug. "She must have forgotten to mention it," she said quickly. "Sure," Matt said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "And I guess she also forgot to mention that you weren't with her at all last night." Emma's face paled. "Matt, I can explain." "No," Matt interrupted, slamming his hand on the table. "You don't get to explain. I followed you, Emma. I know you were at Brian's house." Her eyes widened in shock. "You followed me? Do you think someone can truly forgive an affair? Write in the comments." "That's what you're focusing on," Matt snapped. "Not the fact that you're sneaking around with the neighbor behind my back?" Emma opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Matt didn't wait for her to recover. He stormed out of the house, his mind spinning. He needed space to think, to figure out his next move. Meanwhile, Emma was left to deal with the fallout. She called Brian, her voice shaking as she recounted what had happened. "We need to be more careful," she said, her heart racing. But Brian didn't seem concerned. "Relax," he said smoothly. "What's the worst that could happen? He already knows." What neither of them realized was that Matt wasn't done. He returned home that evening with a calm exterior that belied the storm brewing inside him. "Let's talk," he said, his tone deceptively soft. Emma hesitated but nodded, following him into the living room. "I want to know everything," Matt said, his eyes locking onto hers. "How long it's been going on, why you did it, everything." Emma hesitated, tears welling up in her eyes. "It started a few months ago," she admitted. "I didn't mean for it to happen, Matt. I was lonely. I felt like we'd lost our connection." Her words were like daggers, but Matt kept his composure. "So you thought the solution was to sleep with the neighbor?" Emma sobbed, burying her face in her hands. "I didn't know what else to do. I'm so sorry." Matt stood, his face a mask of cold fury. "You're not sorry you did it, Emma. You're sorry you got caught." That night, as Emma sat alone in their bedroom, Matt began formulating a plan to expose the truth, not just to Emma, but to everyone who had unknowingly been a part of their charade. The real confrontation was only just beginning. Matt wasn't the type to let things slide, especially something as earth-shattering as Emma's betrayal. He had spent years building a life with her, pouring his love and energy into their marriage. Now, the very foundation of that life had been ripped out from under him, and he was done playing the fool. The morning after Emma's tearful confession, Matt decided it was time to expose the truth, not just for his own peace of mind, but because Emma and Brian had been brazen in their deceit, treating him like an obstacle rather than a partner. If they weren't going to end this quietly, he'd make sure they faced the consequences publicly. Matt's first move was to confront Brian. It wasn't enough to corner Emma in their home. He needed Brian to understand the gravity of what he'd done. Matt waited until Brian was outside mowing his lawn, his usual cocky grin plastered across his face. Matt walked across the yard, his fists clenched. "We need to talk," he said, his voice calm but full of menace. Brian cut the mower's engine and turned, feigning ignorance. "Hey, Matt. What's up?" "You know damn well what's up," Matt growled, stepping closer. "You think I wouldn't find out? That I'd just sit back while you screwed my wife in my own neighborhood?" Brian's grin faltered, replaced by a nervous chuckle. "Look, man, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Matt didn't let him finish. Don't insult me. I know everything. The texts, the hotel, last night at your house. Don't play dumb. For a moment, Brian's confident mask slipped. Okay, he said, raising his hands defensively. I get it. You're upset. But this isn't just on me. Emma made her own choices. Matt's jaw tightened. Oh, I'm fully aware of that. But let me make one thing clear. If I see you near her again, there will be consequences. Understand? Brian nodded, his bravado completely gone. Got it. But confronting Brian wasn't enough for Matt. He wanted Emma to feel the weight of her actions, and he knew exactly how to make that happen. The next evening, Matt hosted a casual barbecue, just like old times. He invited their neighbors, including Karen, Lisa, and a few others who had always been eager to gossip. Emma was visibly tense, her forced smile betraying her unease. The event started normally enough, with burgers on the grill and lighthearted chatter. But Matt had a plan. As the night progressed, he casually dropped hints about the affair, carefully steering the conversation without outright revealing the truth. Crazy how close we all are, isn't it? He said, his tone light. Sometimes, maybe a little too close. Karen, ever the busybody, immediately perked up. What do you mean, Matt? Oh, just that some people seem to enjoy sneaking around right under their spouses' noses, he said, smiling as he sipped his beer. The room went silent, and Emma's face turned ghostly pale. Karen, always quick to pounce on drama, leaned in. Do you know something we don't, Matt? He locked eyes with Emma, his smile fading. Why don't you ask Emma? She's got plenty of secrets to share. All eyes turned to Emma, who stammered, Matt, stop. This isn't the time. No, Matt said firmly, his voice rising. The time for hiding is over, Emma. If you didn't want this to come out, maybe you shouldn't have had an affair with our neighbor. The crowd gasped, and Karen's hand flew to her mouth. Oh my God, she whispered. Emma bolted from the patio, tears streaming down her face as she disappeared into the house. The fallout was immediate. By the next morning, the entire neighborhood knew about the affair. Karen wasted no time spreading the news, and Brian's once friendly reputation turned toxic overnight. Emma, overwhelmed by the shame and judgment, became a virtual recluse. She avoided the neighbors, ignored calls from friends, and refused to show her face at community events. But the final blow came when she collapsed in the kitchen a week later, clutching her side and gasping for air. Matt called 911, and the ambulance arrived within minutes. As Emma was rushed to the hospital, Matt sat in the waiting room, torn between anger and concern. He hated what she had done, but seeing her in pain reminded him of the love they had once shared. The doctor emerged an hour later with a grim expression. She's stable, he said, but the stress has taken a toll on her. Physically and emotionally, she's at her breaking point. Matt nodded, the weight of the situation sinking in. Despite everything, part of him still cared. When he entered Emma's hospital room, she looked up at him with tears in her eyes. I'm sorry, she whispered, for everything. Matt sighed, pulling up a chair beside her bed. I don't know if I can forgive you, Emma. But for now, let's just focus on getting you better. And as he sat there, watching the woman who had both loved and betrayed him, he realized that their story was far from over. The days following Emma's hospitalization were a blur. She was discharged with a prescription for rest and therapy, her body weakened by the toll of stress and guilt. Matt drove her home in silence, the weight of their fractured marriage palpable between them. The once welcoming home now felt like a battleground. Every corner reminded Matt of the betrayal. Every glance at Emma reignited the pain. And yet, her vulnerability softened something in him. She wasn't the same confident woman who had lied to his face and snuck around with Brian. She was broken raw and regretful. But regret wasn't enough to repair what she'd done. Over the next week, Emma tried to rebuild their connection. She cooked meals, joined Matt for TV shows they used to watch together, and kept her phone out of sight, likely to avoid suspicion. But Matt saw through her efforts. They felt forced, more like an attempt to salvage her image than to mend their relationship. One evening, Matt finally confronted the elephant in the room. "Emma," he said, setting down his coffee cup, "we need to talk about where we go from here." She looked up from the book she was pretending to read, her face pale. "I know," she said softly. "I've been waiting for you to say something." Matt leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "Do you even want this marriage anymore? Or are you just afraid of the fallout if we end it?" Emma's eyes filled with tears. "I want this, Matt. I want us. I know I've destroyed your trust, and I don't deserve another chance, but I love you. I always have." Her words sounded genuine, but Matt's walls were up. "If you loved me, you wouldn't have done what you did," he said, his voice cracking. "You had a choice, Emma, and you didn't choose me." The next few days were a trial of soul-searching for both of them. Emma began seeing a therapist, encouraged by Matt's insistence that she address the deeper issues that led to her affair. Meanwhile, Matt confided in his brother, seeking advice on whether their marriage was even worth saving. "She's trying," his brother said during one late-night phone call. "But the real question is, can you ever forgive her? And even if you can, will you ever trust her again?" Matt didn't have an answer. One evening, while sorting through some paperwork in the study, Matt found the hotel receipt again. The small slip of paper had ignited this entire ordeal, exposing the cracks in their marriage that had been hidden for far too long. He stared at it for a long time, wondering how something so small could carry so much weight. Emma entered the room quietly, hesitating in the doorway. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, her voice tentative. Matt held up the receipt. "This. The moment everything fell apart." Emma's face crumpled, and she stepped closer. "Matt, I know I can't erase what I've done, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to fix this. Therapy, counseling, anything. Just tell me what you need." Matt set the receipt down, rubbing his temples. "I need time, Emma. Time to figure out if I can ever look at you without seeing this." In the weeks that followed, they began attending couples therapy. The sessions were grueling, forcing both of them to confront their pain and resentment. Emma admitted that her affair with Brian had been more about escaping her own feelings of inadequacy than anything Matt had done. "I felt stuck," she confessed during one session. "Like I wasn't enough anymore. And instead of talking to you about it, I ran to someone who made me feel alive." Matt didn't respond right away. The therapist gently prodded him. "How does that make you feel, Matt?" "Angry," he said finally, "but also sad, because I wish she'd just told me. I would have done anything to fix things if I'd known how she felt." The therapist nodded. "It's clear there's still love between you, but rebuilding trust takes time and effort from both sides. Are you both willing to put in that work?" Matt hesitated, then nodded slowly. "I'm willing to try. For now." As the months passed, life slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy. The neighborhood gossip died down, and Brian sold his house, unable to endure the whispers and cold shoulders from the community. Emma continued her therapy, making a genuine effort to rebuild her relationship with Matt. She was more present, more attentive, and more honest than she had been in years. But for Matt, the scars remained. There were good days when he felt like they were making progress, and bad days when the betrayal loomed over him like a shadow. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Emma reached for his hand. "Do you think we'll ever be okay again?" she asked quietly. Matt squeezed her hand, his gaze distant. "I don't know, but I think we owe it to ourselves to try." Their story didn't end with a perfect resolution, but with a tentative hope for the future. For Matt, the road to healing was long and uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was moving forward, one step at a time.